welcome to our 6th yoga board in our series about the 8 limbs of yoga. And this week we're going to be talking about dharana. And dharana is an interesting concept and a very important part of the 8 limbs of yoga. And I think it's so interesting because dharana sometimes gets a little bit confusing when we start to talk about the concept of meditation versus concentration. And this is the 6th and 7th limb of yoga. So dharana is the 6th limb, which is concentration. And the next limb we're going to talk about meditation, but it's important to start with the aspect of concentration and meditation as two separate things. Because a lot of times, especially in the Western concept of what yoga is and what meditation is, those terms get confusing. There's a lot of things that are actually concentration techniques that people will call meditation. So just keep an eye on that fact. A lot of the things that we do, like visualization or mantra practice, those are things that we use to create an aspect of concentration. And specifically, dharana is the process of creating this very strongly focused, one-pointed attention with the mind. And that is something that can be a precursor to leading into meditation, but it's a separate thing from meditation. This is something where there is very strong effort that is focused at a single point. Whereas meditation, that sense of strong effort almost softens or dissolves so that there's this suspension in that space of meditation without trying to be there. That's the best way that I can distinguish between concentration and meditation. So some of the techniques that I used in the practice to help us with concentration are trataka, which is the candle gazing technique, and it can really be anything. It's a visual concentration technique. It can be the flame of a candle, it can be a picture, it can be a flower in a vase. Anything that you feel like visually is going to hold your interest and that you're going to be able to concentrate on for a minute or a few minutes so that you have this ability to practice how long you're able to keep your thoughts and your attention focused on that one point. And then we watch the process as the mind starts to go off in another direction and it gets distracted. We've lost that single pointed concentration. And then we draw the mind back. We refocus and we see how long we can maintain that concentration again, and then the mind goes off in the other direction and we bring it back. So that process of drawing the mind back and reestablishing that steady focus is what we're training the mind to do. It's very much a process like training a puppy, where you'll tell the puppy to sit and stay, it'll get distracted by something, it'll wander off, and you'll bring it back and you'll try to make it sit and stay again. Very similar to what we're trying to do with our mind in dharana. So one of the other things that we can pull into this is the concentration on the breath, because this is something that seems very natural to a yogi. If you've been practicing for a while, you probably spend a lot of time thinking about your breathing or concentrating on the way that you're breathing, the quality of your breath. So that seems like a natural thing for you to focus on. And for a lot of us, that's a space where if we sit down and we do have the idea that we want to meditate, we can sit and start with a practice of concentrating on the breath and then eventually letting that concentration on the breath dissolve into a space where we have that clarity. Whether that happens every time we try to sit down to meditate depends on the day. Sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes just working on concentration techniques is enough to give you some clarity in your thought process so that you can direct your mind where you want it to go rather than the mind jumping around where it wants to go. And a lot of times we'll use the concept of the monkey mind, that the mind is like a monkey jumping from branch to branch as it constantly thinks about who you need to call or what you need to get at the store or where you need to go later. It will stay on that one task. Like if you're at work and you're trying to finish a document. Your mind can stay focused on that one task until it's done and you start to think about other things. So having a phrase in your mind to help with that process of drawing the mind back can be really helpful. And usually I'll say to myself something along the lines of, right now I'm doing my yoga practice, I'll take care of that later. Or right now I'm trying to meditate, I'll take care of that later. And that's just a phrase that I'll use to almost push the reset button. So if I notice my mind wandering, as soon as I notice that, I say that phrase to myself and I draw back to whatever my focus or my concentration was. So this next concept for concentration is anapanasati, which is a technique of watching the breath come in and watching the breath go out. The breath is that ever-present rhythm that we have that stays with us through our entire life. So it's one of the most basic and accessible things that we can concentrate on. And it doesn't matter if you are at home sitting on your meditation cushion, if you are sitting in your car driving, or if you're at work. You can clear your mind, even if it's just for 10 seconds, and become very aware and very focused on the way that the breath is coming and going, or the sensation at the rim of the nostrils as the breath is coming and going. Something as simple as that can be a mini practice of dharana that you use periodically throughout the day as a way to practice and as a way to train your mind that it is going to be responsive and it's going to focus where you want it to focus. In our yoga practice, there's this concept or this tool that we use called dristy. And dristy is the eye gaze. It is where we fix our external focus, or sometimes where we fix our internal visual focus. There are 9 different dristy points. Some of them are really common, like when we do Warrior 2, you gaze out right over the tip of the middle finger, or sometimes in other poses we might use the thumb as a reference. Sometimes it's down toward the toes, or when we're doing twisting poses, it might be up toward the right or up toward the left, depending on which way you're twisting. But sometimes there is an internal focus. If we have the eyes closed, your internal dristy might be at the third eye point, or it might be at the navel point. So you don't have to have the eyes open necessarily to use the dristy as a way to keep your mind focused when you're doing your asana practice. But a lot of us need that device to keep you anchored, especially if you're newer to yoga. It can be a little bit overwhelming and it can feel like your mind is all over the place. So if you give yourself that anchor to help to create that sense of concentration, it really brings a much more meaningful aspect to your practice, rather than letting it be an hour where your mind just runs rampant and can actually leave you feeling worse than when you tried to meditate, or more frustrated than when you actually sat down and tried to concentrate or meditate. The important thing to take away from any of these different practices, or the yoga practice that we're going to do to work on dharana, is that when we're concentrated, when we're able to hold our eyes steady on one point without darting around the room and looking at 20 different things, the mind stays steady. So where the eyes go, the mind goes. That's a really powerful tool when you're doing your practice or when you're trying to concentrate on something. When I'm working with somebody and we're trying to finish a task, if I'm working with a patient, as soon as I see their eyes go off to something else in the room, I know that I've lost their attention. So it's a process of trying to draw them back to what we're doing. But you can learn a lot by where a person's eyes are going, because you know that some part of their brain is processing what it is that they're looking at. But you can also use that as that tool where you're focusing your gaze on a picture of something that you know to be really calming, like somewhere that you went on vacation at the beach, and maybe you have a picture of that you use as the gazing point for your trataka. Something like that that's going to really help you to settle into that space of feeling calm and feeling focused. But it doesn't even have to be something that innately brings about a sense of relaxation. It can be pretty much anything, a shape, a dot, anything like that. Whatever you're going to be able to gaze at and gradually work on increasing the length of time that you're able to concentrate. Think about when we talked about brahmacharya as something of containing our energy or directing our energy where we want it to go, or even when we talked about pratyahara, about drawing the energy away from the senses, centralizing it, and then once we have that control, then we can decide where our energy goes. Dharana is very much like that. We draw the energy in, and then we say, okay, this one point, this is where I'm going to focus all of my energy. When we talk about dristy in asana practice, a lot of times I'll say to my students that your dristy is like a laser focus, that you are so strongly gazing at that point that you actually feel the effort and the energy behind that dristy. It's so strong. So the energy and the attention are being brought together into that one point. And then down here I just wrote some of the different things that you can use for the subject of your dharana, whatever you want to focus on. It can be a word, a written word, or a word that you say in your head. It can be a Sanskrit mantra or any other mantra, a word, a phrase. It can be a sound. It can be an image. It can be your breath, or it can be a concept like concentrating on the idea of peace. So be careful, because here's where that tricky distinction comes in between what is concentration and what is meditation, because very frequently that word meditation is thrown around when they should actually be saying concentration. And I know I do this sometimes as well, just because most people understand what you're trying to get at when you say meditation. So we kind of perpetuate this idea of incorrectly using that word. But if I was going to say that I was sitting down to meditate on the concept of world peace, I was actually sitting down and practicing dharana. I was concentrating on this idea of world peace and seeing what sort of thoughts or ideas that conjured up. So watch for that distinction between what is concentration and what is meditation. And I think this is going to become a clearer distinction next week when we do the next board and we talk about meditation by itself. Then we can kind of compare and contrast those two limbs. So I hope that was helpful to understand the 8 limbs of yoga as a whole. We're progressing on, getting toward the higher limbs of our practice. So I hope that you'll join me for the asana practice to work on dharana. We're going to focus a lot on our dristy, and we're going to do some variations of archer pose and dancer pose, which are both poses that take a lot of focused energy and attention and help us to burn through the things that cause us confusion or distraction. So I hope you'll be able to join me for that. Thank you for watching. Namaste.